All right, with that being said, let's have a good round of applause for Terry Raposa.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Mike. How y'all doing? You probably can hear me, huh? Okay, well, I'm going to do something because I think that one thing we have to understand about...
It's better a little bit away.
That better? Yeah. Thanks, Mike. I'm going to do something that I think needs to be done because how many people believe that they have inalienable rights? Raise your hand. Okay, how many don't believe they have inalienable rights? Okay, so that means everybody in the room understands where that comes from. Where do those rights come from? You guys mind if I say a quick prayer? Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for the blessings you've given us, and Lord, we just thank you for this country. We thank you for all that you do for us. And Lord, we're not perfect, but you are. And we hope that your perfect will is done. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right. Got a little story to tell you that sort of ties in with that. There was a little girl at the airport. She's sitting down at the airport, and she's with her mom, and she's reading the Bible. And Jerry Brown walks in. And he walks in with his crew. As he walks in, he sits down and looks across at her, and she's reading her Bible. And he said, "Little girl, I see you're reading the good book. What you reading there? A lot of good stories in there, huh?" She kind of looked at him and said, "Yes, sir." "Well, what are you reading?" "Well, I'm reading the story of Noah." "Well, Noah. That's quite a tale, isn't it?" "Well, no, sir, it's not a tale. If God says it, then it happened." "Well, do you really believe that?" And she said, "Yeah, oh, I believe it. And not only do I believe it, but I know it in my heart." And Jerry Brown said, "Well, how did Noah get all those animals on that ark then? I mean, how did he do that?" She thought about it, and she thought about it, and she said, "Well, when I get to heaven, I'll ask him." Jerry Brown looked at her and said, "Well, what if he's not in heaven?" Then she said, "Well, then you can ask him." You know, as we look over everything that's happened here with Jefferson over the last few years and all the different things and all the different people, it's you guys, because this is your state. This is your deal. This is we the people. My friend Wynn Carpenter, who does a radio program with me once a week, went on and talked about Jefferson. And you know, the whole time that he talked, he never used the word I. It was we, us, ours. How many people are here from El Dorado County? Boy, you guys are quiet. If it was Tehama County, they shoot first and ask questions later. Anybody here from Tehama County? Anybody here from...
Our sheriff's here, so we can't shoot right.
Your sheriff's all right. Hey, give your sheriff a hand, huh? How did... We're in Shasta County. We have a good sheriff, too. But you really have a constitutional sheriff. You have a sheriff that'll stand up for you. And a sheriff that'll tell you straight. Talking about telling straight, who's here from Nevada County?
Yeah.
You guys are louder than El Dorado. Should I give them another chance? Who's from El Dorado? How about Placer County? Yeah. Oh, yeah. How about Shasta County?
Yeah.
We only need one person, Janet Chandler in Shasta County. She goes to everything. She's the one who yells for us. How about Calaveras County? Oh. Tuolumne County? Amador County? How about, who am I missing? No, I did. Mariposa County. Oh, you know, we just before I go to Stanislaus, I want to do one thing very quickly. A lot of us have nicknames in this. Rally Sally, okay? You got 10-Buck Terry. You know, we have back there Dave Tishnell from Tuolumne County. How many people from Tuolumne County? They're real quiet. Nickname is Stonewall. Well, we have a new one. A lady that came and visited us from Mariposa County, and she visited us. And as she did, she was thrown into a meeting, into a conference call. Next thing she knew, her head was spinning, and she left that day, and she forgot her shoes. So her name is Shoeless Karen. Give Karen a hand. Shoeless Karen. I have your shoes. You want to take those, sir? Yeah, shoeless. Also, let's see, any other counties here I may be forgetting? Oh! I'll get to you guys, and I won't forget to mention your wife. The other thing that we have to look at is perspective in how we look at things and how we approach them as folks, don't we? We have to look at those things in perspective and be careful what you say to one another. And I'll give you a really good, quick example of that. There was a man and his wife. They're walking through the grocery store. And this is what not to do. They're walking through there. The man looks over. He sees a 24-pack of beer, and it's $20, and he grabs it and puts it in the basket. And she says to him, "You don't need that. Why do you want it?" And he says, "Well, it's 24 beers for $20. She said, "Put it back." Puts it back. Goes on down the road a little further there, and they go to the cosmetic department. She grabs herself a cosmetic to put cream on her face. And he said, "Why are you buying that? It's $40. She says, "It makes me beautiful." And he said, "Well, so does 24 beers. So, you know, what you have to do is you've got to make sure you've got to make sure that when you're talking to people, you're being at least a little, you know, a little bit diplomatic. But I think when we talk about the word commitment, it's a very important thing. We have people like, I don't know, did Lou Manor, did you make it here? All right. Did you bring your bride with you? Stand up, you two. They're from Colusa County, and these two have been out there fighting this fight no matter what adversity. Truman and Cheryl, did you guys make it? Truman and Cheryl from Lake County? Truman drove himself back in his 80s to get to a meeting after getting chemo from Sacramento back to Lake. Monty and Patsy Carter, who single-handedly gave us Glenn County. She had her leg amputated, fighting disease after disease. And all she wanted to do was get here today. Because she understands that unless we do this now, and unless we do this for the liberty, and unless we do this, it'll never happen. There isn't anything in California that doesn't put a crimp in your money, in your life, in your freedom, and in your liberty.
That's right.
And that's why we're doing this. Now, Mike wanted me to mention something about cruise tickets, and I'm not totally privy on that. You have cruise tickets back there for ours. Okay, that's our cruise ticket. Okay. We have cruise tickets back here for the court case, and they're
$20 a piece.
$20 a piece.
Or 11 for $100.
Or 11 for $100, and it's a $3,000 cruise. Anyway, so
I'm sorry, six for $100.
6 for 100. So now that I completely botched that, I'll get back to what's important.
Cruise goes where, Terry?
Pardon me?
Is it a cruise to Alaska or wherever you
It's
want?
cruise anywhere you want.
Oh,
$3,000 toward any cruise you want.
there you go.
And the tickets are back there. But I think the thing we all have to realize now is that this is done mostly for our kids and grandkids, isn't it? You know, and I know that, you know, and let's face it, what's happened to us economically? A dollar doesn't go where it used to go, right? Because when you look around you and you go into a store, I used to be able to pick up a pack of baseball cards, some cheese, a couple of eggs, a Coke, candy bar, and I'd walk out of that store. You can't do that anymore. It's too many cameras, but that's for you, Sheriff. I'm warming them up for you, buddy. So, now as we look forward to something that's going to be historic and a gentleman that's led us there, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Baird.
I got to turn on my star.
And his bride, Cindy.
That's the countdown to the IED, probably. Everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Thank you all for coming and sharing your Sunday and being here today. This is so important what we're doing, and I apologize. I have my notes again. This time I swear I'm going to use my notes because there are a lot of things I just don't want to forget to tell you, and I probably will forget anyway, but I'll do my best. I'd like to just say another short prayer, and this prayer was last uttered on December the 7th. Lord, bless your people and save them. Help them defend your cause and those who defend it. Stir up those who are afraid, direct those who are willing to help, strengthen those who are wavering, give wisdom and integrity to all of us. Order all things so that they rebound to the glory of God. This prayer was last uttered December the 7th, 1683, by Algernon Sidney, about 2 seconds before he lost his head for opposing the reign of King Charles II. And some of the things that Sidney opposed are things that we oppose today, because there's nothing new under the sun, as Solomon said. Liberty was first uttered in a sentence about 6,000 years ago, and you can see it in the Bible, and it says, proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all those within it, as something like that. And so then in Cato's letters, it was also said that liberty is a fleeting cause. And in 6,000 years, there have been very few fleeting moments of freedom. And usually, where there is liberty, there is a plot against it. There are moments of darkness in this world, and there are moments of light. But the two can't exist in the same place, because light cannot have fellowship with darkness. Where there is liberty, and where there is none, liberty can't exist. So what we're trying to do is, I would like to try to build a case for you today. And I am a Christian, I'll say that right out loud. I believe that Jesus is Lord. However, it doesn't matter for our purposes today whether you're a Christian or not, because this is a legal argument upon which this country was built. And this country was built by Christian men and women on Christian principles. And I can prove that in 1,000 documents and 1,000 letters and 1,000 speeches. And quite frankly, anyone that disputes that just doesn't know history. But once again, this is not a religious argument, it is a legal argument. Because I think what we're asking ourselves today is, do you trust a government that doesn't trust you? Do you have trust in a government that has lost all trust from the people that created it? Do you have the right to challenge a government that has lost its way in rule of law? Because according to John Locke and according to Thomas Paine, and there are a couple of founding documents that created this country, and in the court they call this the meeting of the minds. If you want to know why a contract was created and why it says what it says and what the original authors of the contract meant, because the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of California is nothing more than a social contract, isn't it? I mean, it is simply a contract between the people who created the government and the government who was created in order to serve those people. In other words, the government is the product of the contract. It's the creation of the contract. It is not the creator. You are the creators of the contract. And once again, Marcus Cicero, some 2,000 years ago, said that some laws are not written on paper. They're not written anywhere. They're only written in the hearts of men. We don't derive knowledge of these laws through any training. We derive them from nature itself, and by nature he meant God. That's when people say nature and nature's law, in those days they meant God. That's what natural law was. It was God's law. So once again, as a legal argument, if we follow this, there is a difference, according to Thomas Paine, in common sense, and Thomas Paine was there. He knew what the founders were thinking. He was one of them. When the contracts were created, Thomas Paine was there. The things that he said you can believe as truth because he was one of the founders. He knew what he was talking about. And he said, and John Locke, who all of the founding fathers, mind you, has anyone ever read John Locke's Principles of Government? Have you read both of them or just one of them? How about William Blackstone's Treatise on Law? There are a couple of books of that. What about Hobbes or Montesquieu or de Tocqueville? All of those are the guys. Now, if you said that, if you asked that question in 1801, pretty much everybody would raise their hand. There was no TV, no movie, no computer, there was nothing to distract you. You read at night. And most of the men and women had read all of those things. And so when we go back to the meeting of the minds, why we have the governmental structure and the contract that we have today, we have to go to what they thought. Because what they thought is the contract. Those are the rules we live by. Here's the governing principles of the United States of America, right there, about a 1/16 of an inch thick. And it's all we need if we live by this. But what Locke and what Thomas Paine said initially was, and Blackstone agreed with them, and in fact all of them agreed on these principles, society is different from government. Society is different from government. Because when people came here to this country, how they came here is irrelevant, what their motives were are irrelevant. But when they came to this country, they were simply a society. They were just people. And according to Paine and Locke, the people themselves had to form a society or they would die. I mean, can you imagine coming to a country like the United States with hostile Native Americans all around you, and you're in this kind of a running fight for survival and to get food, and you go out in the wilderness and you chop down one tree, and you're going to drag that thing back to start building your cabin? And you chop down another one. Now you got two on their side. You can chop them down, but you can't move them and you can't lift them. But what if there were 10 of you? All 10 of you, you'd figure out a way, a block and tackle system, a drag, get some animals involved. You'd enlist your neighbors. And together, in a society, you would then build everybody's cabin. That's how they did it. That was society, not government. Now, as more and more people came to the colony, some people decided to kind of take a back seat to the work. Well, now all of a sudden they say, hey, you know what? When we first came here, everybody kind of pitched in. Now we're not. Because guess what? People sometimes aren't moral, are they? So society, according to Locke and according to Thomas Paine, is always beneficial because neighbors help one another. We do that at home all the time. Somebody needs my backhoe, I tell them the key's in it, come take it. We leave the keys in our cars in case our neighbor needs an emergency car to go to the hospital. We don't ask them for gas money, we just do it because that's what people do for one another when you care about each other. And we do that all the time. Our sheriff's department loans people to other counties for fire duty. I don't even know that he gives them a bill. That's just what we do to help one another. That's the way it should work. That's society. But now all of a sudden government enters the picture. And government enters the picture because God is removed from the picture. And once again, this is a legal argument. If you lack the morality to do what's right in all cases, now all of a sudden there has to be some kind of rule, right? And that's what regulations are for. And so Thomas Paine in Common Sense said, little pamphlet, founding document, one of them, he said that the first government will be the branches of a big tree. And everybody in the colony will sit under the branches, and they'll talk about what makes them mad and what makes them happy and what they want and what they'd like to see happen next. And so then the first laws are probably more regulation. You know, look, Joe, we all pick up garbage on Wednesdays, and we notice you don't show up on Wednesdays. You fish. That's not okay. And the punishment for those first laws was probably public embarrassment. You know, everybody picks up garbage on Wednesdays, you're no exception, and away we go. But then Thomas Paine said, as the colony grows, and there are more and more people, it'll be impossible for everybody to just gather and talk. So what they would have to do then is elect representatives. And as the population grows further, pretty soon the tree won't hold them. They've got to go to a building somewhere. And when the colony grows in geography as well as population, now it's too far for everybody to come. So representation must grow along with population in order that all parts of the colony and all the people within it have representation. And that representation should think the same as they do. They should not be apart from the people. Because when representation grows apart from the people, all of a sudden, they start having designs of their own. They stop thinking for the people they represent, and they start thinking on their own behalf. And in other words, it's good to be king. And that was the problem with the king. What happens when you tell a guy he's the king? Well, goodness gracious, he starts acting like it, doesn't he? So, and that's what happens when you form a representative body that no longer touches the people that they represent and no longer cares what the people think. And then the furthest end of that is it becomes so expensive and so difficult to change out that representative that you can't do it. And in California, that's where we are right now. 98% of the time, we never get rid of an incumbent because it costs too much money. And it just is too much for the average guy who is a patriot, who wants to think about government, who wants to represent his neighbors, who wants to do a good job. He can't possibly get elected because he can't get the $1 million it takes. You look at Senate District 1, that's 11 counties. In order to just tell everybody in those 11 counties who you are as a candidate, it's called the naming statement, and get that on the ballot, and Steve Baird's back there somewhere, he was faced with this, it'd be around $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Where a state senator in a county that has a very dense population would only have to have one naming statement for $2,000. And that's what we run into when representation becomes so condensed that it fails to represent the people anymore. And you know, Daniel Webster said, hold on to the Constitution, my friends, with all your strength, and to the Republic for which it stands. For miracles do not tend to cluster, and what's happened once in 6,000 years is not likely to happen again. And that's what we're in danger of losing. We have a Constitution in California that's around 110,000 words. There are so many ways to change the California Constitution, it's absolutely ridiculous. And you know, that Constitution, because it's so difficult to get through and read, no one ever does. I mean, it's interesting to me that the governor of this state is in violation of Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, because he went out and he made a deal with a foreign power, right? That's unconstitutional, and it's very clear. And this rule book's not very hard to read. But he violated this article, and he did it on purpose, and he doesn't care. He did it in France, and he did it again in China. He violated his own oath of office, which is in Article 20 of the California Constitution, under miscellaneous, because in that oath, he swears to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of California from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. He violated Article 3 of the California Constitution because in there it says California is an inseparable part of the United States and the Constitution of the United States is the highest law of the land. So he violated 2 articles of the California Constitution, 1 article of the United States Constitution just in that one act. He doesn't, okay, we'll get to that part. He doesn't care. The state's attorney general doesn't care. In fact, no one seems to care. So, are we a nation of men or are we a nation of laws? Because society is built by men and women. Government is built to serve the men and women in society. In other words, society is comprised of people. Government is comprised of the law. In society, you're allowed to do anything you want, provided you don't harm your neighbor's life, liberty, or property. In government, you are only allowed to do those things which are permitted by law, because you serve the people who created the government. You don't serve yourself. No matter what your agenda is, you are not allowed to violate the law. That's the whole point of being a nation of laws, not of men. And so we have in California a government that is lawless. Do we trust a government, first of all, that no longer obeys the law? And do we trust a government that doesn't trust us? For example, when you have, this happened once before, I think. I believe Charles I lost his head in 1648 because he disarmed his populace while the government remained armed. Now, in the California legislature, they exempted themselves from the show cause laws that all of you have to live by. And yet when Kevin De Leon jumps in his Suburban, he's got a Suburban in front of him and a Suburban in back of him. I'll bet you every one of those guys has a semi-automatic rifle with a large capacity magazine. But you are not allowed to have those. So if he gets in trouble somewhere, he will be well defended, where if you get in trouble in the same place, you will not. In fact, you may not be defended at all. Because if you didn't show good cause, you're already prohibited from carrying a weapon in California anyway. And if you can't jump through the eye of the needle to get a concealed carry permit, you will be disarmed. Now, this is interesting because John Locke, one of the Founding Fathers' favorite authors, he said there are three absolutes. He said natural rights are absolute rights. That's funny. Dianne Feinstein, United States Senator from California, said no right is absolute, provided the government wants to change it. But the guy that the Founding Fathers looked to create the contract that governs this country said there are three things that are absolute and a fourth that goes with it. He said the right to life is absolute. When you're born, it's your life. That is an absolute right. And you have the right to live that life any way you choose, provided you don't interfere with someone else's life or their property, because property is the second absolute. How can you conduct your life if you have no idea what you're going to be allowed to own from one day to the next? In fact, we could say that liberty must be protected at all hazards. You have a right to it, derived from your maker, John Adams. John Adams said the inalienable rights come from your maker. And he said, and even if that were not true, that liberty was purchased with the ease, the estates, the blood, and the treasure of our fathers. So even if you had not received these absolute rights that John Locke describes, they were purchased for you with the blood, treasure, and honor of your fathers. So there are two ways that you have these rights. Once again, let's follow the legal argument here because we're leading up to our court case. So if we have those rights, life, property, right? And you may enjoy that property according to Locke in any way you choose, provided you don't interfere with someone else's property and you don't interfere with their life. Those are two that are absolute to everyone around you. You have the liberty to do those things which you choose to do, provided they don't interfere with the life and property of others. And then necessarily, according to Locke, you have the absolute God-given right to defend yourself, your liberty, and your property. And Locke also believed that that liberty extended to your community. How could you consider yourself a moral individual if you saw your neighbor being attacked violently and you did not help him? How could you possibly be considered a moral person if your community or your state or your nation were being violently attacked and you did not offer to help, provided you have the health and wisdom and the means and wherewithal to do so? And the veterans of this country have done that for hundreds of years. Our fathers did that. In fact, they paid for our liberty doing just that, against a government that was absolutely and abject and morally just in opposition to liberty, life and property. In fact, John Adams went on to say that if you're right, if your property is your right, then aren't your rights your property, right? So if your rights are your property, let's say you've got a little house and you have a quarter-acre lot, and someone from the state shows up and says, you know, we're in a little bit of money trouble, and what we need to do is we need to narrow that lot 10 feet on each side and kind of 10 feet front and back, and you know, we're going to sell that off, get some money. But you'd be horrified, wouldn't you? I mean, you wouldn't like that. But what if they said, you need to pay $1 more a gallon for gasoline than anyone else in the nation does, because we need to save the world from this thing called global warming. And whether that's true or not is irrelevant, because we're 0.012 of the population of this planet. You could give up all your money and you're not going to save the earth alone, right? So why is it fair for you to save the earth, but it's not fair for people in China or other states? And in fact, why don't we go back to Article 10, Section 1, Clause 3. How would a government created by you, the people, work if all the governors of all 50 states were just globetrotting around the world making their own deals with the Chinese and the French and the Afghans and the Peruvians and Bolivians and everybody else? How could we possibly conduct our affairs as a nation if all of the governors acted like our governor? It kind of just wouldn't work. I think anybody could see that. So under a Republican form of government, we insist that those who represent us follow the law. What do we do when they don't? What do we do when they look at you and say, we are above the law? And there were two really famous guys that argued about this, Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle, that's where the word aristocracy comes from, he thought there should be a class of people up here, and they should create laws to which they are not subject, and they should use those rules to make you stay in line. And then Plato believed in republic, and we already know what republic is. So under Aristotle's model, and by the way, Woodrow Wilson had kind of the same imagination, he thought that there should be an educated elite, and they should be trained in the ways of government and bureaucracy because you're too stupid to know how to conduct your own life. And so they'll tell you what to do and then you just do it. And then we have a much larger class of people who do all the work and stuff and wash the dishes and mow the lawns for the people who make the rules. That's what Woodrow Wilson believed. It was an elitist type of attitude. It was a progressive attitude. And believe me, most of the amendments to the Constitution that really kind of come back and haunt us today were in the progressive era. So we have to decide whether these are the rules, whether the California Constitution is the rule, or whether it isn't. And if it is the rule, why don't we demand that the people who are supposed to represent us live by those rules? The California Constitution has been amended 525 times in 160-something years. Can you imagine that? I mean, a bum on the road can change that document. That thing is so big, nobody's ever read it. I have asked all kinds of public officials, and believe me, I've sworn an oath to the United States Constitution twice, or 3 times in my life, and the California Constitution twice. And you know what happened to me the first time I swore an oath to the California Constitution? I was walking out of the room. I was really proud of myself. You know, I graduated, I made it. I was, you know, a big deal somewhere in here anyway. No one else thought so. And in fact, that joke Terry told, yeah, that's actually a true story. We were in the market and my wife went to the beer. And I was going for the Rogaine. But anyway. So I walked out of the room and I realized I'd never read it. I'd never read the California Constitution. I never read the document I just swore an oath to. I thought, man, that's bad. That is shameful. So I went home and I read it. I could not believe the garbage that was in that thing. There's stuff about school busing that doesn't apply anymore. There's stuff about whether a reporter who gets in trouble with a judge has to reveal their source. There's so much ridiculous garbage in that. I don't blame people for not reading it. But if you don't know the rules, if you, the people that formed this government, and you did, and I can prove it. How can I prove that? We, the people of the state of California, grateful to Almighty God for our freedom, that to secure and perpetuate its blessings, we formed this Constitution. People formed the Constitution of California. They did so for one reason, to protect and perpetuate their liberty. And we don't even know what's in that thing. And let me tell you, the governor's never read it. I can tell you that for sure, because he violates that every day. Kevin De Leon's never read it. None of the people in Sacramento have read it. I can't imagine that. E. Dodson Wilson, the state parliamentarian, he wrote a book about the California Constitution. He called it the joke of the legal world. He said it's everything a constitution ought not to be. That's the government that we're living with now. And that brings us to an important point. Society in almost every case is a benefit to people. Government in almost every case is a necessary evil. And in cases of tyrannical or oligarchy, it is an intolerable evil. What do the people do when they find the government so intolerable that they feel like they have to act? Here's our problem. We are a moral people, all of the people in this room. We are constitutionalists, that's why we're here. I'm not a member of any political party. I couldn't care less about any of them. None of them represent me. None of them ever have. But I am a constitutionalist. I believe that we were endowed with certain inalienable rights and that all men were created equal. And that governments were instituted among men, deriving all of their just power from the consent of the governed. And whenever government fails in that end, it is our right and our responsibility to abolish that government and institute a new government. The California Constitution, Section 2, Article 2, Section 1. All just power is derived from the people. Government was instituted for their benefit, and they have the right and the responsibility to alter or reform it anytime the public good demands. Anytime the public good demands. All power is derived from the people. Well, what an interesting concept. Because if you fail to report your average flow, they are going to come and chain your head gate closed. You haven't stolen anything, you just screwed up the paperwork. You'll lose your water. If you fail to get a smog check, you can't register a car. If you fail to do all of these things that this government tells you that you must do in order to conduct your life with your property in your way, you're going to get jailed. You're going to get fined. Is that constitutional republic? Is that an oligarchy? Is that tyranny? Where do we draw the line and what do we do about it? Well, we find ourselves in a unique position in California, where when California was created by the people who said, "We the people of the state of California," they instituted a form of government that had one state assembly person for every 2,500 and one state senator for every 6,000. And it stayed that way for a couple of decades. And then at one point, and this was just prior to the 1879 Constitution, the people in Sacramento, our legislators, they decided that it was really irking them that there were a lot of Chinese people moving to California. And so they hatched a little plan. They said, we will stop adding representatives as population grows because we need to stop the Chinese from getting any power in California. In fact, the theme of the 1879 Constitution was get rid of the Chinese. Article 19 in the 1879 Constitution was it's a felony to hire a Chinese person. So in 1879, they turned to the people of California, and by the way, you know, prejudice is a funny thing. In 1870s, it was the Chinese. Today, it's you. I mean, that's the problem. That pendulum of discrimination, that pendulum of bias is always swinging, and it swings from one group to the next. So in 1879, they turned to the people of California and said, it is no longer convenient for this government to represent all of you. So what we're going to do is stop at 80 assembly people and 40 senators, and we're just not going to grow anymore. But their theme was keep the Chinese from getting power. That's part of the court case, by the way. So at any rate, now 150 or so years later, and 39 million additional people come to California while not one single representative is added to our legislative house. This is an interesting principle because one of the principles in the Constitution of California, the Constitution of the United States, is 3 branches of government, right? Legislative, judicial, and executive. They're co-equal branches of government. In other words, it's a 3-legged stool. And if the stool has 3 even legs, liberty doesn't slide off the top. But if one of the legs is a lot shorter than the other 2, all of a sudden the top is tilted and liberty goes off into the gutter. In California, 2 branches of government have been growing like weeds since 1849. We had 50 judges in, I think it was 1860. We had 50. We have 2,500 now. We had 5 state agencies in 1849. We have 570 state boards and agencies, and you know, give or take a few. So 2 of these branches of government are growing like crazy. But here's our problem, people. Our house, the legislative house stopped growing 150 years ago. And guess what our house is tasked to do? It is tasked to oversee the other two. Well, you know, if you have 120 legislators, you can probably keep an eye on 50 judges. And you wouldn't have too much trouble yanking the purse strings on the governor if he started going to foreign countries and selling gold or something. And you wouldn't have any trouble overseeing 5 state agencies, 50 judges, and a governor. But how about 150 years later, with 570 state boards and agencies, 2,500 judges, you can't even get a court date now. And in fact, the courts, being the biggest branch of government now, actually write legislation, don't they? I mean, legislation doesn't come from the legislature now, it comes from the courts. Whatever the court says, in fact, the court can read the Constitution, Article 1, I think it's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4. The United States Congress has all authority over immigration and naturalization. That's in the rule book. That's right here. So why is it that the court can say, no, it doesn't, I do? The Ninth Circuit said to the President of the United States, you don't have authority, I do. So the court now is in charge of immigration, really. I mean, and that's not in the rule book. That's not in the book we wrote. That's not in the California Constitution either. It doesn't say anywhere in there that the court has authority over the Constitution. In fact, Article 3 of this book says the court has authority over things under the Constitution. The court has no authority to change the Constitution. It only has authority to enforce the laws or interpret things. Now, we say interpret. Well, that's a dangerous word these days because courts interpret stuff all the time, don't they? But William Howard Taft, who was a president of the United States and he was also Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he said that the Constitution is not a living document, and I can prove it because it's written in words. And you can look the words up in the dictionary. So unless the dictionary definition of words are changing all the time, the Constitution never changes. It means exactly what it said. In fact, he went further and he said, and if you want to interpret the Constitution correctly, you need to look at Webster's 1828, because that was the nearest dictionary to the time the Constitution was actually written. So the actual meaning of the language is most clear in the 1828 of any dictionary, and that was from a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And in fact, we have a fourth branch of government that we don't even use anymore, the jury. And John Jay, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Birdsale versus Georgia, he told the jury, he said, although it's the old rule that the court should judge the law and the jury should judge the fact, he said, you have the absolute right to judge both. We don't do that anymore. In fact, if you talk about jury nullification in a court in California, the judge will start screaming at you, and if you're a lawyer, he will threaten to disbar you for doing something that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court said that you should do. And we're getting closer now to our court case because we're establishing things that really establish the rule of law. So as a moral people, how do we tell the government that we don't think they're doing a good job? Well, first of all, it has to be legal, right? It has to be moral, because morality guides us, not the law. The law never stopped anybody from doing anything, did it? I mean, we have 22,000 gun laws on the books. Did that ever stop a murderer intent on murder? Does PC 187 stop a murderer? No, it just describes the punishment. I mean, why don't you murder people? Because it's wrong. I mean, I don't speed because it's wrong and it's dangerous. It's not because of the law. That means nothing. I mean, morality stops you from doing the things that are wrong, not the law. The law only punishes you if you get caught. And that's what we were talking about before. Society is different from government. Society is moral. It has a moral judge. You derive rights from that moral judge. Those are yours to use. They're above government. Government has no authority over your inalienable rights. Never did, never will, unless you allow it. Because a liberty unexercised is a liberty lost. Now, is exercising liberty dicey sometimes? Yeah, it is. Do you have to have the courage to exercise liberty? Yeah, you do. Because otherwise it's as though you don't have it. So in the state of California here, we find that we have no liberty anymore. We have no representation. We have no access to representation. We can prove that. We have declarations from 21 counties, and we'll probably have a couple more pretty soon. We have petitioned the legislature, our House, with thousands of phone calls, thousands and thousands and thousands of emails, thousands of personal visits. And not one single legislator has ever asked us what we want or why we want it. That's the people's house. You put them in those chairs, and they care absolutely nothing about what you want or what you need. They don't even want to ask you why you want it or why you need it. They couldn't care less. Why? Because you can't touch them. You can't get rid of them. You can't unelect them. You can't replace them with one of you. You don't have the money, and you don't have the political power. Unions own this state. That's where the money comes from. And the money talks in elections, with very, very few exceptions. And what are those exceptions? They're local. Why? Why does your sheriff win with such a large plurality? Because you know him. You know what kind of man he is. You know what he stands for. You know what he'll do. You don't always like it, probably. I mean, I know my sheriff, he'll tell you the truth even when you don't like it. But you know it's the truth, and you know he's doing it because he thinks it's right, and you have a way to change that if you don't like it. Vote. And it doesn't take billions of votes. Now let's do the arithmetic in California. We have one state senator for about 1 million people. We have one state assemblyman for about 500,000 people. Do you think if 50 of you got together and called your state assemblyman and somehow you got past the staffer and you talked to him, which I dare you to do, and you said, you know, we're so mad at you, we're not going to vote for you anymore. Do you think that would change his behavior? No. What about 500 people? What about 1,000 people? What about 1,500 people? Does he really care? No, because it takes 250,000 votes. Let's say everyone's registered and everyone votes. I mean, just as an arithmetic exercise. He doesn't care about you, or he doesn't care how you vote. And you can't make him. Now, let's say we had the California that the people actually established, where you had one assemblyman for every 2,500 people. The people in this room could change out the guy in that chair. Do you think he would care what you thought before he did something? You betcha. Do you think he'd be afraid of you if he did something stupid? You bet he would. But now, yeah, you know, not so much. And now let's go to the state senate. One guy for 1 million people. You know, I did the arithmetic on this once a long time ago, and don't quote me on this because I don't remember exactly, but it's something like if he got one call from everybody in his district once a year, he'd be able to spend 1.7 seconds on the phone with each of them, and that's if he answered the phone and did nothing else 8 hours a day, 261 days a year with time off for vacation and Christmas and stuff. I mean, is that representation really? I don't think so. So we decided, we meaning the people in this room and the people in 23 counties, just like this. There was some news guy, oh, I remember it was, there was an article written in this professor in Oregon that's never been here and has never talked to any of us. Well, he wrote about Jefferson one time. And he said, it's just Mark Baird and some of his buddies. It isn't big. I have a lot of buddies, I got to tell you. I mean, you know, and it's not my doing, it's the want for liberty. So what do we do? How do we approach this? Well, first we asked the legislature. The answer was deafening silence. So the next thing we decided to do, being moral and ethical people, we sued them. And we sued the state of California for lack of representation and dilution of vote. And I have to say, that's been a real education to me. I've been in court lots of times, not for things like this, you know, as a spectator or as a witness, but I've never actually been a participant in a lawsuit like this before, and it's a real education. I got some bad news, folks. The court doesn't care what you think, and they don't care what you want. And I'm telling you, you created the court, by the way. That's part of the document we call the social contract, the Constitution of California. It created the court. This document, Article 3, created the federal court that we're in right now. And I am telling you, there is no response to the people, but there is to the money in the state. You know, the court cares a lot about what the state thinks. So we filed our motion, and they filed their motion, and we filed our amended motion, and they filed their response to our motion, and then we filed a rebuttal to their motion to our motion. And then we got down to the first hearing. We very politely, and I think the Declaration of Independence call, every time we have appealed for rectitude to our grievances, we have done so most humbly. That typifies this crowd. I have never been anywhere with anyone from Jefferson that has ever done anything but act morally, legally, and ethically. And I am so proud of that. And I'll tell you what, that's one of the reasons we're going to win. So we got to court the first time, and we were supposed to have a hearing finally. And we requested in writing by the attorney that the judge provide us the biggest courtroom, because we knew that hundreds of people were driving literally hundreds and hundreds of miles to witness the legal process in action. And it's funny because the judge even invited that. Oh yeah, I invite all the people to come in. We need to see justice in action. And then 15 hours before the hearing, she canceled it without warning. And I believe that was done to send a message. I believe that was done to send a message. Can't prove it, but that's just what I think. So then the hearing was rescheduled for another month. The state's attorney, his arguments, I think, in my opinion, and in the opinion of our attorneys as well, were very weak and shallow. He took a very lazy approach to this. His arguments were this. Yes, you probably don't have enough representation, but since everybody in California is screwed equally, there's nothing the court can do about it. I call that the two wrongs make a right argument. You know, I take exception with that, and my first exception is, if that's true, why did we bother with the Nuremberg war crimes trials? I mean, all of the dead were equally dead. All of the tortured were equally tortured. Their grievances were suffered equally. No one was any more or less dead than anyone else. Why bother to try the murderers? The harm was general, she called it. General, and it was relatively equal. And, you know, my response to that was that the people who created the government, the people who created the contract, are the only ones, and that's supported, by the way, with several Supreme Court cases, which we made known to her. We are the only ones that have standing no matter what. We have standing in court because we created the government she is supposed to serve. However, she also said that because this is a political question, courts can't get involved in that. I almost choked on my milk when I read that, because that's the reason we're here to begin with. Baker versus Carr, Gray and Westerbury versus Sanders, Reynolds versus Sims. And in Baker versus Carr, the dissenting justice made a really big point. This court has no business sticking its nose in the thorny thicket of state politics. And also, the reason Judge Mueller dismissed the complaint were exactly the same reasons that the three-judge court dismissed Baker versus Carr and were overruled by the Supreme Court to begin with. So I just thought, boy, there's some circular logic going on here. You are the people, but you don't have standing because you're all harmed equally. Well, I guess in Castro's Cuba, if someone was able to get to court and they were able to find a court that would give them justice, the judge would say, you know, I'm sorry that this is a tyrannical, dictatorial government where people are being jailed and imprisoned and murdered wholesale, but, you know, since you're all screwed equally, there's nothing we're going to do about it. I mean, well, where does that take you? You appeal to the legislature, you appeal to the courts, and you don't get justice. Uh-oh, now what? Now what's left? The right of revolution? The Founding Fathers gave that to us, right? In the Declaration of Independence, you have the right to alter or abolish any form of government that is destructive to your ends, and that is securing liberty. Well, we don't want that. I mean, we just want to go to court and have justice. We just want our day in court. So the judge said, I'm going to dismiss your complaint. However, I'm going to give you leave to amend. Was she being nice? No, not really. Shapiro versus McManus tells her she does not have the jurisdiction to dismiss a case where voter dilution or abridgment of vote under the 14th Amendment is accused. She doesn't have the jurisdiction to dismiss our case. So what I think she's doing is, I think she's going to keep dismissing the complaint until she hopes we run out of money and just go away. But guess what? We are never going to go away. Never, ever. You know, the one thing about natural law, the one thing about the basis for your rights, it is timeless, it's immutable, it never changes, it never goes away unless we allow it. That's where we are now, folks. And I see a lot of young people. God bless you young people for being here. Thank you very much. Because we'll be gone. I mean, I don't think I'll last long enough to recognize, you know, true tyranny. You know, I'm hidden up on my ranch. I'll probably pop off before it gets so bad I'd notice it. But you people won't. And our children and our grandchildren will be here in a state they will not recognize and won't be able to afford to live in. Most of my family's already gone. They can't live here. I mean, they certainly can't live, my son can't live in the county I live in, there's no jobs there, you know, and that is the benefit of tyranny. That's the benefit of representation restricted to certain areas in the state to the detriment of other areas. That's the benefit of 1 million people per state senator. He doesn't care what you think. He doesn't care how you live. He doesn't even care whether you live. So we've gotten the case now to where we've had our second dismissal of the complaint. Now, in the first dismissal, the judge said, I have some problems with your subject matter jurisdiction. That's standing, basically. And this is also the political question. I have some problems with that. And I will define some questions that I have, and when you amend your complaint, please answer those questions so that we can move this along. Oh, by the way, when she first saw the case, she gave us our 3-judge court immediately. And Title, I think it's 8, Section 2284 of the U.S. Code says that any abridgment case or voter dilution case that regards to any federal legislative body or any state legislature, the judge must appoint a 3-judge court unless she finds the case to be frivolous and without merit. So the only ground she can dismiss on are frivolous and without merit. She's never said that. No one said that. The state hasn't even said it. The state simply says, well, you're all screwed equally, so we can't help you. But they never say that we don't have a good argument. In fact, one thing the state has never said, and this is kind of interesting to me, they have never said, yes, you have plenty of representation. That's the other side of the question, isn't it? We're going in there and saying we don't have enough representation. Our people are going without access to their legitimately elected representative. They've never said, yes, you do. They simply say, no, you're just all screwed equally. So they even admit that the merit of our case is true. But they don't want to try it because they are scared to death that if we win, it will rip the rug out from under status quo politics in the state of California and give power back to the people who created the government. And you notice, this isn't about party. It isn't about issues. It has nothing to do with those things. This is about one thing and one thing only, and that is liberty. And that is your ability, as Thomas Gordon said in 1721, he said, every plowman knows the difference between good government and bad because he knows by how much of his produce, his own produce, he's allowed to keep. I mean, if you grow something, you have a right to keep at least a portion of that. Thomas Jefferson said the yoke should be light. He said no more than 10% in taxes. More than 10%, you burden people and you ruin their lives. And who is most able to pay the 10%? The middle income people, the poor people? No, I don't think so. So anyway, our grievance is legitimate. The state admits it. They don't want to try it. The judge doesn't want to try it because can you imagine what will happen if she is the judge who allows the legislative model in California to be changed this dramatically? Wow. You know, I agree. That's a tough position to be in, but I don't care because we are the people and we demand liberty. So she appointed the 3-judge court initially. Well, the state's attorney went in and he filed an application ex parte, and that's an emergency application to have the judge reconsider a ruling. And here's what he did. He never even filed the motion. He simply filed the application, which jurisprudence-wise, that's a little shaky. She ruled off of an application instead of waiting for the motion. But she ruled for the state. Well, Edmund Koch said all courts are corrupt because the judge knows who pays them. And all courts are corrupt. That's why we need to get to the Supreme Court with this case. So, Title 8, Section 2284 says, all abridgment and voter dilution cases demand a 3-judge court. This is very, very important. The judge ruled for our 3-judge court, then she changed her mind. Now we have to refile the motion with the questions she wanted answered, only she reissued the ruling and she didn't ask the questions. She simply took the state's attorney's brief and she basically regurgitated it and said, you're all screwed equally and this is a political question. Your complaint is dismissed with leave to amend. So we're going to come back again. And this time, oh, and by the way, our original complaint alleges invidious discrimination. The California Constitution itself is a discriminatory doctrine meant to exclude a class of people from political power in California. We allege that in our first complaint. She ignored it in the response because that is an individual harm. And if she finds any individual harm, we go to the three-judge court. So 2284 says three-judge court. Why is that so important? No one judge can be trusted to decide on a voter abridgment case. They can't. It takes the three judges. It takes wise and learned jurists to decide what should happen when the people are denied representation. And the interesting part about that is, if the three-judge court dismisses the case, we have an appeal, right? Every case you get to appeal because you can't trust one court, you can try again. Well, what is the appeal for a three-judge court? It is the United States Supreme Court. Do not go to the Ninth Circuit. That's why the three-judge court is so important, because the Ninth Circuit is filled with crooks. I mean, I think they're overturned 85% of the time now. That is not justice. So we mapped a strategy that would take us directly to the United States Supreme Court. However, the federal judge has a tremendous amount of power. She must find that the case has standing and is justicable. That was another thing. She said, well, yes, okay, so you don't have representation, so you have 1 for a million. You know, but what would happen? And she said this to Mike Waters in the hearing. Well, what would happen if I found that the representative model in the state of California was unconstitutional? And he looked at her and said, well, I don't know, Your Honor, we never thought about it. That's how much care that he gave his response. So she kept going. She kept picking at him. And she said, well, yeah, but don't you think that it would be really a slippery slope if over a discrimination cause of action, so she knows about the invidious discrimination, she knew it. Don't you think over a discrimination case, if we were forced to increase representation, don't you think that would be a slippery slope? And Waters, well, I don't know, he was acting like he wasn't getting it. He's kind of like, well, he just sort of stuttered. He didn't really say much. And she said, well, don't you think that if we found this representation level is unconstitutional, that sometime in the future someone else would come back and say, now you're being unconstitutional in this area, and ask for more representation? And all of a sudden the light goes on in Waters, and he says, well, yeah, that would be a slippery slope. Who would it be a slippery slope for? Not for us, because we would benefit from having adequate access to our representation. Once again, if I had an assemblyman, even just one in my county, I could affect events. I could hope to. I could hope to get enough of my neighbors and friends to vote differently, or what if I love the guy? I could get enough of my neighbors and friends to help support the guy to get him reelected. What if I had a state senator that represented my county? Would he care what I thought? He'd have to, because my county's small enough that I could get enough of my friends and neighbors either to support or replace him. Now what does he care about? He cares about getting money. I would love to see the calendars for all of these representatives. I'd love to see how often they meet with individual constituents, and then make a ratio out of how often they meet with lobbyists, corporate heads, union members, union leaders, things like that. I wonder what that ratio would look like, and that may come in a FOIA request down the road. So where we are now is our attorneys are filing a motion to reconsider because we think the judge is dead wrong. And they're also amending the complaint. And here's another tool the judge used. Our complaint's like 50 or 60 pages. And she said, you have to amend your complaint. Oh, but you can only have 25 pages to amend it. So what she would like to do is see half of our argument go away. Is that really justice? You know, I mean, can you say to the people who created the government, yeah, you can argue your case, but it's got to be, you can describe liberty if you can do it in 10 words or less. Well, that's not justice. And we demand justice. So we've got a couple of things that we have to do now. On the, is it 22nd, honey? 22nd? 28th. Okay, at the 28th, and we've talked to the attorneys about this, on the 28th we're going to have a protest at the federal courthouse, the Matsui courthouse in Sacramento. What do you think, Terry, 3 o'clock? Perfect. 3 o'clock. And what I would like to bring is, I'd like to bring thousands of handwritten letters demanding justice. That's it. And they have to be written in your own words. You know, if we give 10,000 form letters, then you just read one, throw the rest of them away. I don't care what they say. What mine says is, the people demand their day in court. And you have not the authority to deny us. That's what mine says. That's good enough. 1 or 2 sentences. We demand our day in court. We demand justice. The people who created this court demand justice. And you do not have the constitutional jurisdiction to deny it to us, because in Article 3, you have jurisdiction over all things deriving from the Constitution. You have no authority to change the document. We are the people that created it. We have absolute rights. We have absolute power over the people we elected to serve us. Our liberty is more important than your rules. Our liberty is more important than your position and your power. In fact, our liberty is everything, because without liberty, I guarantee you, you won't be allowed to keep what's left of your money. And with the things that are coming here in this state, like service tax, service fees they call it now, meters on wells, drive by the mile, yeah, I could go on and on. You guys know it. You're fairly well educated politically, most of the people that we talk to, so you know what's coming. You know what these idiots are doing, and they do it on a daily basis. And they don't care what you think or what you want or how you have to live. And so that's why we must demand justice now, because if we fail asking for justice, what avenue do the people have left? Are you prepared to give up your liberty and just lay down and open your wallet and open your door to general warrants, to taxes beyond measure, to taxes you can't appeal? I mean, the state's already abolished the tax board. I mean, why? Because the people could appeal to them. Now it's a bureaucracy. I mean, it's another one now. It's 576 state agencies that you have no direct appeal to, and they're not elected. They don't care what happens to you. And you can say something's wrong to them all day long, but guess what? They get paid by the governor, not by you. And the governor puts them in their chair, not you. So your liberty is gone, even in taxes now. You have no hope here. Our only hope is to adequate representation that is accountable to the people according to Thomas Paine's model, according to John Adams's model and Thomas Jefferson's model, and all of the people who created the contract in this state and the contract in this nation that our government has sworn to serve and sworn to uphold. You know, there are a lot of heroes in this country, a lot of them. You could go on all day about it. People say this is too hard. That's what most of the people around me say. That, you know, it's too hard, man. I got hay to put up. I got kids that need to go to soccer. God, it's never going to happen. They just tell me, it's never going to happen. You know, if you think you're going to get a lot more representation, you can forget it. It's just never going to happen. And you know, I think that there are so many examples. Alvin York, Pastor Jonas Clark in Lexington, April 19, 1775, sitting around talking to John Hancock and John Adams. And John Hancock was pretty scared, you know, because that wasn't a Revolutionary War, by the way. That was a Civil War. They were Englishmen. Their own government was coming to kill them that night, and they knew it. They're sitting around the pastor's house, and John Hancock was scared. He said, he said, Pastor Clark, and the pastor had 70 men drilling out in the yard against 700 British regulars. He said, are your men ready for this? You know, really? Can they handle this? Or am I going to die here tomorrow? And Pastor Clark said, I've been training my men for this very moment all their lives. That's what Americans are. George Washington said that the difference between the American Christian and anyone else on earth is that the American would rather die on his feet than live on his knees. So if this court case succeeds, we win. We'll go to the Supreme Court, we'll win there. And if we don't, you know what? We may have to fight. I don't know. I hope not. But that's the last avenue. So I want you to prepare yourselves. All we want are letters. These are easy. A few letters. Ask your friends to write them. Ask your family to write them. If we show up there with several thousand letters on that afternoon, and we take them into the courthouse, and we show the judge that the people are demanding justice, I don't know if that's going to change her mind, but it's got to help her thought process. I don't know if that'll change the court's mind, but we have to demonstrate that the people here are never going to go away, that we're never going to quit. Never, ever, ever, ever. Winston Churchill made a very famous speech after World War II at Sandhurst. He stood up and he said, never, ever, 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 ever give in. He sat back down. What more can you say? I mean, the cause of liberty was paid for with the lives, the treasure, and the sacred honor of our fathers. We have one job as citizens. One. Secure liberty for our posterity. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your politics are. I don't care what you look like. It doesn't matter what you need and what you want. Because without the liberty to express yourself, none of the rest of those things matter. I will stay and answer any questions that you have, and thank you so much for coming today. Are there any?
We got some questions over here. Thanks.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, sir.
So my question has to do with the court case as it relates, to the state of Jefferson. From my understanding, the courts cannot split a state. Is
Right.
that correct?
That's correct.
So then, if you win in court or you get to the Supreme Court and win, how does that create the state of Jefferson?
Okay, well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Because here, they're in the court, once this gets to the Supreme Court will either find with the trial court, the three-judge court, or they won't. If the Supreme Court finds with us, then the case will be remanded to the three-judge court for settlement. In other words, yes, you guys are right, go back to the federal court, because as the Supreme Court, typically in the modern era, they don't meddle in the money or the settlement. So if we go back to the federal court, we're going to need some benchmarks. And that's one of the things the federal judge says is, well, this is not justicable. Because in other words, if I find that you're right and the representative ratio of California is not constitutional, now what do I do? Basically, now what do I do? And we say, well, that's not true. It's very justicable. First of all, George Washington said 1 for 30,000 is democracy, 1 for 40,000 is tyranny. The founders of California said 1 for 2,500 in the Assembly and 1 for 6,000 in the Senate, and they did that for a long time until the legislature arbitrarily stopped them. Article the First, which is a federal case going through the federal court, and by the way, they got their three-judge court even though everyone in the United States is screwed equally from lack of representation in Congress. And Article the First says no less than 1 for 50,000 in the federal Congress, and states, according to, I believe it's Federalist 46, state legislatures should even be bigger than the federal Congress. So that would dictate a number of between 1 for 20, 1 for 30. All of the plaintiffs have different goals, right? I mean, some of the plaintiffs want 1 for 50,000. Personally, what I want, and I am a Jefferson plaintiff, I want the model of government that the framers of California put in place. And we lived under successfully. And that is 1 assembly person for every 2,500 and 1 senator for every 6,000. We have 40 million people. That'd be 20,000 assembly people and 10,000 senators, wouldn't it? Well, the state of California would not want to do that. I mean, I don't care, because I am the people and I want representation. The fact that it's not convenient, in other words, I find the statement indefensible in court to say, for the government created by the people, to say it's not convenient to give you adequate representation anymore. I think that statement is indefensible. If you can't do it, then smaller governmental units can. State of Jefferson. So if you don't want to represent the people here, then let us go legislatively. You have a monoparty here. Everybody knows that. You can vote any law you want, any day you want. No, but it's not a secret to anybody. You vote for an Article 4, Section 3 state split, and we remove our cause of action. We go away, and you can keep stealing from your own people until they get tired of it. That's how we hope to get Jefferson. Let's say we don't get that, but we get something near it. We get 1 for 10,000 and 1 for 20,000. We have new and better representation that we can use to attack the problem legislatively again. Look, this isn't perfect. This isn't a perfect answer, but it's legal, it's ethical, it's moral. Nobody gets hurt and we get liberty. That's the way we have to do this. There's no other way to do this where we can win. So that's what our hope is, that the settlement is onerous enough that the state of California will not comply, and they would rather see a smaller governmental unit in our 23 counties, and then they hope to keep doing what they're doing. Now, that does not absolve them of the cause of actions demanded by the other plaintiffs who are not part of the state of Jefferson. They want liberty too, and there are a lot of them. There are people from the Bay Area that are plaintiffs. They want liberty. There are people from Southern California that are plaintiffs. They want liberty. Now, they may end up with something less, one for 100,000, one for 50,000. Cool, that's great. Once we're gone, it doesn't matter to us what they do, because we will have gained the most important thing that a state can have: sovereignty. And we can use that sovereignty to give liberty to our people in a way that if we do this right and we live by God's law and not our own, we can give liberty to 100 generations before some crafty load of politicians can figure their way out of it.
Good job.
I'll try to be brief. My name is Mike. I just wanted you to address one small aspect of that, and maybe I missed your covering it already.
No, but I didn't do it unless somebody saw me.
Okay. Too many cameras. Is there, in practical terms, the short version of, at the state level here and at the federal appellate level here in California, is there a way that they can effectively somehow stop us from getting to the U.S. Supreme Court?
Yes. There is one way that they can stop us from getting to the United States Supreme Court. One. And that is if a single federal judge dismisses our case as being frivolous and without merit. This judge has had that opportunity 3 times. The first time, she appointed the 3-judge court and said, and now mind you, in a 3-judge court, Judge Mueller would be one of the judges. The other 2 would be drawn from a pool from the 9th Circuit. So that 3-judge court would be West Coast judges. However, she would be one of them. Now, the way she gets this off her plate is give us the 3-judge court. Then she can say the devil made me do it or something. But if she finds the case frivolous and without merit and dismisses the case with prejudice, then we don't lose. We still have the right to appeal, but we'd have to appeal to the 9th Circuit. Now, Shapiro versus McManus is very strict, very narrow, and this isn't guidance. These are instructions from the United States Supreme Court to federal courts. She may not dismiss this case unless it is already settled law, which it isn't. No one's ever brought a case like this before, or the case is frivolous and without merit, and no one has mentioned that in almost a year. So our case has merit. It is not frivolous. That removes one way she can get rid of us. And it is not settled law. So her other tactic, the only tactic left open to her, is continue to dismiss each complaint until we run out of money and just go away. Now, we've raised over $400,000 for this lawsuit in rooms just like this and in the mail. I mean, it is absolutely miraculous and amazing to me that people are opening their wallets, and they continue to do so. And with all of your help, we will continue to be able to fund this until we find a way to get that 3-judge court. Now, if we get the 3-judge court, even if we walk into the 3-judge court and they say, you people are nuts, case dismissed, guess what? We get to appeal to the United States Supreme Court. In Baker versus Carr, the very first political case that was non-justicable, that was general harm, that was a political question that courts shouldn't enter, they got that 3-judge court. The 3-judge court dismissed that case in a second, and then the Supreme Court overturned their decision. So if we get to that 3-judge court, we're guaranteed a trip to the United States Supreme Court. There's no cert process. That is our appeal, and they must hear it. And we got all of this information, and we gained this legal strategy from the legal team in Abbott versus Evenwell, and they know, because that's exactly how they got to the Supreme Court. So there is a small chance, and here's the chance. She can get rid of us if we lack the backbone, the morality, and the courage to keep going. That's the way we'll lose. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Okay, I don't want to change the direction of the conversation, but I do have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I receive a lot of articles, emails about this new California movement.
Yeah.
How does that affect us? Because a lot of the articles appear to be coming from state of Jefferson but it's clearly a different movement.
It's a different thing. You know, look, if I'm for liberty, I'm for everybody's liberty. That's the way it works. It's a different thing. I don't agree with them, but you know, they're free to seek liberty in their way. And look, if they get us a new California, okay, there's a start. I mean, but no, it doesn't affect us at all. It really doesn't.
Hi, my name's Terry, and for someone that goes out and tries speaking with business to encourage business support, what is a good rebuttal for how is Oregon, these counties in Oregon, how are they just going to join us?
Okay, well, the process under Article 4, Section 3 is very clear. It's only about 2 sentences long. Nor shall any state be formed from the territory of an existing state or two adjoining states unless the legislatures affected agree and Congress agrees. That's the only way they can join us. However, being late to the table doesn't hurt them. We started this before the Oregon counties got involved. They want liberty too. I'm sorry, I don't have the heart to say no to anybody that wants liberty. So, you know, what we're telling them is develop your people, develop your committees, develop your political strategy, try to go to your legislature. However, the interesting part about our strategy is that when the Supreme Court talks, everybody has to listen. So if we get one for 2,500 and one for 6,000 as a justicable benchmark for adequate liberty, so do they. And they can use their newfound representation perhaps to tear away from the I think there are 1 or 2 counties that rule the entire state of Oregon. And that's the county around Portland and Salem. So except for those 2 counties where most of the people are concentrated, the rest of the state pretty much agrees with us. So it would be very likely that they would have enough legislative authority because remember in Article 4, Section 3, you only need agreement. Agreement is majority plus one, or 50% plus 1 vote. So we're kind of hopeful, and if not, they can bring their own court case, and as an established state of Jefferson, why wouldn't we welcome some resource counties who have a kind of a shared economic sense and a shared historical sense that want liberty? Welcome.
How much longer do we have to wait?
Oh, God.
Because, like, I only have a few more years where I can go to school here before I have to leave because I won't be able to afford to stay in California.
Yeah. Here's our problem. Here's our problem with the Constitution and the federal court. You can't make the court give you a timeline. They are, in a sense, out of control. They make law now, they ignore the people, they ignore the legislature, they ignore the executive branch, they pretty much ignore everybody except themselves. They've been trained to do that because we never told them no. The executive never told them no. The People's House never took their money away from them when they failed to uphold the law. So now we have a federal court that acts like it is all 3 branches wrapped up into one. There is no timeline. You can't make them act. You can't tell them when they can act. We can file writs of mandamus, which is in effect suing the judge for misconduct. We toyed with that writ of mandamus, but here's what happens. So we file a writ of mandamus and we demand action, and Judge Mueller says, okay, here's the action, case dismissed. So you got to be careful what you ask for because you might get it. So the answer to that is, and I'm really sorry, the answer to that is I don't know. But Rome wasn't built in a day. The civil war that created this country was over a decade long, and the peace treaty took even longer, and we had to fight them again in 1812 to make it stick. So I can't tell you, but all I can say is it is worth the wait, because if we don't do this, and we have a window here, we have a narrow window of opportunity. People in the state of California are tired. They are tired of having a boot on the back of their neck and the other boot on their wallet. So people are starting to wake up. They are tired of criminals who enter this country by criminal nature or criminal ways. They're tired of that. They're tired of a lot of things that the state legislature is doing. The window is open now. What we need to do is not quit. We need to get tough, and we need to stay strong, and we need to fund this lawsuit, and we need to make this work no matter how long it takes. I'm in it for the long haul, you know. And if we don't quit, it's just a matter of time. Stick it out.
Sir, is the Jefferson Constitution at a point where it can be made public?
It's pretty close. You know, we had a great committee, and Steve Baird was intimately involved in that, and we have a great constitutional committee, and we have basically a finished product. But what we don't want to, because here's one thing the Founding Fathers knew more than anything. They knew the Declaration of Independence was a worthless piece of paper unless they won the war, right? I mean, the Declaration of Independence would not have made quality toilet paper unless there was a win in the war. So what we need to do is we need to come off some kind of win, and then we can have an assembly where we pass out to all of the delegates from all of the 21 counties, and hope to be 23 counties soon. We can pass out samples of that to bring home to the counties and tear it apart and remake it in your own image. Because look, we're not the kings of Jefferson here. You are, right? Monarchy's not a good thing. I'm not the one that decides that. You will. This is government of, by, and for the people. That's what John Locke said was the most important thing about a representative government, that it is of, by, and for the people. So when we have that starting point, and that's all our constitutional draft will be, is a place where you start. And then you tear that apart, you give us back all of the ideas and the things that you vote on, and then when we get closer to statehood and victory, we'll have a constitutional convention and ratify it, and away we go. And mind you, when West Virginia got away from Virginia, it didn't take very long. They formed a government very shortly. I mean, the war was on. They had to do something. They probably had a government in a couple weeks. You know, my question to you is, there are so many examples from Jonas Clark and John Parker and Adams and Washington and all those, Jimmy Doolittle, Alvin York. I could just go on forever and ever. I mean, are we less than them? Are we not as smart as they are? Do we not have the courage they have? Do we not have the intestinal fortitude that they have? I tell you, no, I don't buy that. I think that we have all of the courage it takes to do this. And all we have to do is do it. All we have to do is stand up and never quit and mean it. That's it.
Are you done with your entire presentation here? Because I'd like to just ask you a question myself.
Okay, but you're scaring me now.
I know.
Does this involve arithmetic?
No, because the thing that you brought forth here today is really something that's, how many people here really enjoyed what you heard? Yeah. And I realize that many people are making sacrifices. And I think that one of the things that I know you and I have talked about, and something that you brought forth that's near and dear to you, and that is a situation that not only is California doing things to us illegally, there is no rule of law, but right now aren't we a sanctuary state, and aren't they trying to give illegal immigrants a vote? You want to touch on that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do want to touch on that. I don't want Siri, I want the paper that Siri's holding. Hang on one second. I got to get some glasses out for this, everybody. Yeah, we started a petition. This was Sally's idea, I believe, to put a petition on whitehouse.gov. Here's what the original petition says. Whereas the state legislature, with the help and collusion of Governor Brown, have violated Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 of the United States Constitution, which gives Congress the power to enact all uniform rules over naturalization, the executive and legislative branches of California have declared themselves above the law and have willfully violated their oath of office by passing legislation declaring California a sanctuary state. Whereas the governor and all of the voting members of the California legislature and its attorney general are knowingly and willfully in violation of the United States Code Title 8, Section 13243, 4, 5-1, 5-2, and 5-3 for concealing, shielding, harboring aliens who have illegally entered the United States. Whereas the California legislature and its governor have conspired to and did in fact conclude climate change agreements with foreign powers in order to diminish and degrade the legitimate foreign policy of the United States and its duly elected president, these illegal agreements are violations of Article 1, Section 10, Clause 4 of the United States Constitution, as well as Article 3, Section 1, and Article 20 of the California Constitution. Whereas the state legislature, with the collusion and aid of the governor, exempt themselves from laws to which the citizens are subject. The California legislature exempted itself from show good cause provisions of concealed carry regulations. The effect is to disarm its citizens while the government remains armed. Whereas the California legislature, with the collusion and approval of the governor, has violated the public's trust by unlawfully burdening our exercise of Second Amendment rights. They have unlawfully enacted controls on interstate commerce to deny the citizens of California access to firearms and ammunition, which are commonly and routinely purchased by the citizens of other states. Whereas the state's attorney general and the legislature, as well as the governments of all the large urban areas, have openly declared their full intention to fight and resist the Constitution of the United States in order to further the above-mentioned acts. Therefore, the representatives of the 23 Jefferson counties in General Assembly, and by unanimous consent appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the people of the counties of Jefferson, solemnly publish and declare that these counties of Jefferson, by right of Almighty God, ought to be free of tyranny, free to seek our liberty and our fortunes as sovereign state of Jefferson, equal to any other state in the Union. We petition the United States government to immediately declare that the state of California is engaged in insurrection and sedition, and further declare under Article 4, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution that the counties of Jefferson are now, and by right, the 51st state, separate and sovereign from the tyranny of California now and forever.
Woo! Yeah.
Now that stick in the mud, Sally Raposa pointed out that I can only have so many characters. How many was that?
800 characters. That includes spaces and periods.
So she had to water this down, and she eliminated a lot of the verbiage, but basically it says the same thing. So here's what we need. You can go to, is it up now?
Yes.
You can go to whitehouse.gov, and yes, you have to put your name and your email address down. And for those of you that are afraid of being on a list, I have bad news for you. You're probably already on a 100 list. So please put down your name and your email address and vote yes on that petition, because if we get 100,000 signatures, the White House has to respond. Now, I'm not naive enough to think they're going to do what we want initially, but it will raise our awareness to a national level, and they will have to take a look at what's happening out here, and maybe the Justice Department will get involved, and somebody will show up with a pair of cuffs and take the governor where he belongs.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you have to go to your email and validate after you put your name and stuff in there? Okay, so please do that. But we need 100,000 signatures. Come on, folks. I mean, you read some of the petitions in there and they get 100,000. I know we can do it. And we've had outreach from people in Eastern Washington that they're actually going to their legislature to introduce a bill to separate from Western Washington, but you have friends and family in other states, you know. Like I said, when the Supreme Court talks, everybody has to listen. Get them to sign this petition. Let's get this up. Let's kick this tyranny up to the national level. Let's get this to where people start talking about this and start saying, hey, wait a minute, something ain't right here. You know, I've been an airplane pilot all over the world. I've been to every socialist, dysfunctional pest hole on this planet. And I got to tell you, absolute power never corrects itself. Tyranny never steps up to the mirror and says, you know, I better take that one back. Idi Amin never apologized for throwing half his population to the alligators in the Nile River. He just never did. And, you know, if we want to stop that here, we've got to get people to wake up and say, wait a minute, that isn't what we signed up for as citizens, and we can do it. But it's going to take every single one of us. It's going to take all of you. Please take 15 minutes a day and let's get this done.